So, what if some of the best tools for fighting depression weren't in a bottle, but were actually hiding in plain sight right in our daily lives? Today, we are diving deep into some powerful, evidence based alternatives to traditional treatments. These are tools that, as you'll see, are accessible to pretty much everyone. Let's get into the science of feeling better. First, to really get why this matters, you have to understand the sheer scale of the issue. We're talking about 320 million people. That's the World Health Organization's estimate for how many people are affected by depression across the globe. For decades now, it has been a leading cause of disability worldwide. So this isn't some small, niche problem. It is genuinely one of the biggest health challenges we face today. For a lot of people, the first line of defense is medication. And look, medication is an absolutely essential, life-saving tool for millions. But it also brings up a really important question, one that kind of frames our whole conversation today. Is it the only answer? And this chart right here really shows you why that question is so critical. When you look at the research on the most common first-line antidepressants, you find that about half of the people who try them don't have a significant response. Only about a third, or 33%, find their symptoms go away completely. Now, this isn't to say these medications aren't important. They are. But it definitely shows why we need to have a bigger toolkit, why we need to explore other effective ways to help. Okay, so where do we even begin? Well, let's start with one of the oldest and maybe one of the most powerful tools we've got. It's time to really look at this science behind the power of movement. You know, the idea that moving your body is a form of medicine, it isn't new at all. It actually has incredibly deep roots. We're talking all the way back to Hippocrates, the father of medicine, who used to prescribe motion for better health. Fast forward a couple thousand years to 1621, and Robert Burton was talking about exercise as a cure for melancholy. But it wasn't really until the 1960s that scientists started to systematically study its antidepressant effects. All right, so to really get the research, we have to be super clear on what scientists mean when they say exercise. It's not just, walking up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. We're talking about physical activity that is planned, it's structured, it's repetitive, and it's all done with a specific goal of improving your fitness. And that little distinction, it's key. So what kind of exercise are we talking about exactly? Well, most of the studies have focused on two main types. You've got aerobic exercise, think running, swimming, anything that gets your heart pumping, and then you have resistance exercise, like weightlifting. But here's the most important part. The research has shown that both of these types have demonstrated real antidepressant effects. And those effects can be pretty huge. I mean, one massive study of 1.2 million adults found something amazing. It found that people with a depression diagnosis who exercised had 34.5% fewer days of poor mental health compared to those who didn't. That is a really powerful, tangible improvement in people's lives. Now this might be my favorite takeaway from all the research, just because it makes this whole idea feel so achievable. It turns out that meeting the standard public health recommendation, which is just 2.5 hours of brisk walking a week, is associated with a 25% lower risk of depression. That's a pretty small investment of your time for what could be a huge return on your well-being. Okay, so movement is a powerful tool for the body when it's active. But what about a fundamental process that happens when the body is at rest? Let's dive into the profound connection between our sleep and our mind. This quote just nails the core of the issue perfectly. The link between sleep and mental health isn't a one-way street. Insomnia makes you more vulnerable to depression and anxiety, and then having depression and anxiety makes you more vulnerable to insomnia. It can feel like a totally vicious cycle that's impossible to break. So how in the world do you break a cycle like that? Well, one of the most effective evidence-based methods is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. And it's often delivered digitally these days. Think of it as a program to basically retrain your brain for sleep. You learn about your own patterns, use techniques like stimulus control, which just means reassociating your bed with only sleep, and you even challenge those anxious thoughts you might have about not sleeping. The whole goal is to rebuild a healthy relationship with sleep. Which, of course, leads to the exact question a huge new study wanted to answer. If you treat the insomnia, does it actually help with the anxiety or depression that's often tagging along for the ride? And the results were fascinating. The study took over 1,700 people and split them into two groups, one with insomnia plus psychological distress and another with just insomnia. And what they found was that the digital CBTI program worked just as well at reducing insomnia for both groups. So, crucially, having anxiety and depression didn't stop the sleep treatment from working. But here it is. Here is the absolute kicker. For the group that started out with psychological distress, treating their insomnia did more than just help them sleep. It also led to a significant reduction in their symptoms of anxiety and depression. So, by fixing the sleep problem, it helped ease the mental health burden too. It's an incredible finding. All right, let's pull all of this together. We've looked at the science behind two really powerful interventions that don't rely on medication. So, what does this all mean for how we think about mental health care? The first key takeaway is so simple but so profound. Move your body. Planned, structured exercise isn't just for your physical health, it is a potent antidepressant with a long history and some really strong modern evidence to back it up. And the second takeaway? Reclaim your sleep. The link between our sleep and our mood is just undeniable. Treating insomnia with proven methods like CBTI can not only bring back restful nights, but can also directly relieve symptoms of depression and anxiety. When you think about it, both of these are really about empowerment. They're behavioral tools. They give us agency over our own mental well-being, helping to empower our minds through the actions of our bodies. And that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. We often think of healthcare as something passive that we receive, a pill we take or a procedure we get. But what if the future of mental health care is also about what we do? What if our daily habits, how we move, how we sleep, aren't just supplemental, but are actually fundamental?